Morning all, welcome to the Sustainability Committee meeting, 16th of April, 2025. I'll open us up with a karakia. Tuta mai irona, tuta mai iraro, tuta mai iroto, tuta mai iwaho. Kia toa te moritu, te moriora, ki te katoa, homie, huie, tai kie. Good to see everyone here, including members of the public. Joined at the front here by our Administrator Natalia Kushnarenko, our Governance Manager Hannah White, David Murphy, General Manager Strategic Planning, and acknowledge the officers and senior leadership team that are here with us today. The meeting today is being recorded, and it's also being live streamed on the Council's YouTube channel. We'll just draw your attention to the health and safety information on the screens in front of you. Around fire and emergency, on hearing the alarm, please leave immediately via the nearest fire exit and evacuate in the assembly area, which is Te Maraeohene. And in terms of health and safety, smoking and vaping is prohibited in the building as well as in the entrance. And there is a defibrillator outside the entrance in customer services on the ground floor. And any near misses or incidences, please do report to our committee administrators. We do have several online participants, and welcome Councillors Fitzgerald, Deputy Mayor Debbie Marshall-Laub, and Councillor Finlay online. You're requested to keep your cameras on and microphones muted unless you are addressing the meeting. And should I fail to introduce anyone before they start speaking, please do introduce yourself. We have not received any apologies from committee members. Are there any apologies from the table? Seeing none, we'll move to notification of additional items. I've not been notified of any additional items. Are there any from the table? Appearing to be none. Moves us through to declarations of interest. Are there any declarations of interest around today's matters? Not seeing any. That moves us through to public comment. I've not been notified of any public comments, although obviously we will soon be hearing submissions. So that moves us through to the first substantive item of the day, which is the hearing of submissions. And in order to hear those submissions from submitters, we first need to consider the two recommendations on the screen in front of us, which I'm happy to move, seconded by Councillor Zabel. Firstly, that the committee receive the submissions and hear submissions from presenters who indicated their wish to be heard in support of their submission. And secondly, that the committee note the procedure for hearing of submissions as described in the procedure sheet. Seeing no questions or comments, we'll call for a vote on that. Thank you. Vote now. And we have a result, 14 votes for and none against. Thank you all. So that brings us to submissions. I draw your attention to the printed copy in front of you, which is the most recent list of submitters to be heard. And you'll note that we're hearing submitters in two tranches, starting with several at this point. For those who are here to submit, thank you for coming today and choosing to further elaborate on your submissions. You'll have 10 minutes in which to address your submission, and during that time you're welcome to use as much of that as you like for speaking to us, and as much of that as you like for responding to questions that we may have. Just in terms of the standards within the chamber here, we don't expect to hear any offensive or racist language through the course of that submission, and just providing that as a notice up front for submitters. We'd invite you to speak to the main points of your submission. We have read your submissions. You do not need to reread your submissions to us, but you're more than welcome to amplify the main points in the submission. When you approach the table, for those of you that are not familiar with, there's a speaking microphone console in front of you. The right-hand button will activate the microphone. You get a red light, and strangely, red means go. So once you've got a red light, it's good to go. And we just ask that you do speak into the microphone. So those preliminaries being out of the way, I'd like to call the first submitter who is here, which is Chris Tiacherel, submission number 186 for colleagues. Chris, you're quite familiar with the table. I would invite you to settle in, and when you're ready, happy to hear your submission.
Great. Thanks very much. Today I am intending to speak with you, so appreciate the time once again. Look, I don't support any of the options that were consulted on, as I said in my written submission, but I do support the creation of a PNCC-only CCO to manage water for the city, because it does appear that that will help with financing what is necessary. However, I do have strong concerns about the CCO model because of the potential difficulty in controlling a CCO, i.e. in getting it to do what you want them to do. That's because CCOs are not directly accountable to the public. Water councils, and councils can have difficulty in controlling them. PNCC has had that very experience with Te Manua and the forerunners of the CEDA, which were Destination Manawatu and Vision Manawatu. Indeed, CEDA was created partly as a way of solving the perceived problems with the latter two organisations, but sorting things out took years of effort. Having letters of expectation and 6-monthly reporting is no substitute for direct control of activities. Reports can be presented to obscure what is happening. CCOs, with their own CEOs and staff structure, can develop a culture of their own that may not align with that of councils. There will be egos that may result in resistance to what is viewed as external direction coming from council. There will be additional links in the chain of command, and with each link, there is the potential for delay or inaction. And these potential difficulties are likely to be all the greater when there is more than one council involved. The example of this that is so obvious is just to our south in Wellington Water. The argument that joining with one or more councils to form a joint CCO will enable economies of scale to be achieved is purely an assumption, yet it underpins the modelling that has been done. It seems based on the idea of industrial output, but water supply and wastewater and stormwater management are not industrial output. They're requirements of communities to sustain human and other life that can't be moved elsewhere. Even if water were an industrial output and economies of scale were possible, going from 90,000 people to 220,000 people for the 4-council option is a very minor change in scale that is not likely to create significant savings in the purchase of pipes, pumps, etc. And if it's only a 2-council CCO with Horowhenua, let's say, then the increase from 90,000 to 120,000 is even less and likely to result in no economies of scale at all. But let's say I'm wrong, and that the economies of scale are substantial and worth the trouble of having a joint CCO. Why not just have independent CCOs making joint purchases? They could agree on their planned individual activities at the start of the year, identify the material needs, and place combined orders with suppliers. PNCC has a good record of maintaining its water infrastructure, acting very quickly to address problems, which is so important given the damage and harm that can be caused by water. The major problem we have is due to penny-wise, pound-foolish decisions made in the late 1990s. The prospect of saving money in the short term seems to too strongly affect councils as well as central government's thinking, and the proposals to form joint water CCOs is a good example of this. Our problem is that we simply haven't charged enough for water services over the years, knowing that one day major upgrades to infrastructure would be required. KCDC, HDC, and MDC all charge $1,300 to $1,500 a year per rateable unit, once you include the water meter charges of KCDC, while for PNCC it's only about $900 to $1,000. And thinking that ratepayers from other districts are going to want to subsidise PNCC ratepayers, as the modelling suggests will be the case, I think that's pretty far-fetched. We have to be willing to pay what it costs to do water well locally. Finally, I commend submission 180 to you. It's on pages 444 to 446 of the agenda document. It seems to be one of the few that's demonstrated real knowledge of the system. Its point about the problems likely to arise from the disconnection between water and roading infrastructure that occurs when either is taken out of council's direct control is particularly worth taking heed of, as are several other points that it raises. Thanks very much, and if you have any questions, I'll try to answer.
Thank you, Chris. Just check if there are any questions from colleagues either online or in the room. Councillor Naylor.
Thanks, Chris, for your submission. I'm just interested, you've expressed that we need to pay to do water well, and you've expressed a preference for a local CCO model. Given the funding, the cost of that, what are your thoughts on the concern around affordability to those who perhaps don't feel that they can afford that level of increase?
We have to find a way. Things have to be paid for, and we all have to share the costs of that in some way or another. Exactly how that is done, I think, is another question, and it's a valid one. Yeah, I don't know right at this moment. I haven't turned my mind to that aspect, the practicality of how to actually make it affordable. I mean, it's going to have to be financed through a loan, and loans can have different terms. We can have differentials on different rating units done in various ways. So there's already two possible ways that you could adjust how much each rating unit pays.
Okay, thank you.
Councillor Isabellan.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. Thanks, Chris. I just wanted to clarify, was that submission 180 that you were commending?
I've made a copy of it. Yeah, I'm pretty sure it had 180 at the top of the page.
Right.
And it was 3 pages, of which I've only copied 2 here. Let's see, the pages 444 to 446 is the note that I had.
Great, thank you. Just wanted to check that. Thanks very much.
Thank you, Chris. Just one question from myself. Some of the options that are being contemplated, and I acknowledge your submissions that you do not support any of the three options put forward, but some of the options include water services across multiple catchments, and others include water services within a catchment. I just wondered if you had had any reflections on the kind of potential tensions that could arise working across catchments when we're talking about trying to improve water quality over time.
From an ecological or environmental perspective, I don't see a great issue with working across catchments, except that the distances then involved are probably considerably greater. And the practicality of operating over a very wide area, I suspect, is somewhat greater than working in a relatively small area. I guess I am assuming in all of my comments that any organisation that is formed wouldn't be creating one massive central water treatment infrastructure and then piping it to all the other places. I'm assuming that everybody sort of keeps basically their own infrastructure that they've already invested in and operates it for the benefit of people in that area and in that catchment. But from an ecological environmental perspective, I don't see a huge issue.
Great. Thank you, Chris. There don't appear to be any further questions.
Okay.
Thank you again for your submission. It will be considered alongside the other 288 in the council meeting of 7th of May.
Great, thank you.
I'd like to call the next submitter Christine Staples. Colleagues, that's submission number 196. Welcome, Christine. The right-hand button, well played, and once you're settled in, we're in your hands. Looking forward to hearing from you.
Well, first of all, I've got to take my hat off to you all. I had a bit of a deep dive into the legislation and stuff recently, and yeah, you've got a big lot of stuff to keep in your head, a big lot of information to keep in your heads over all of this, and a lot of very important decisions to make. And so I appreciate being allowed to come here today and give my 2 cents worth. Some of my concerns regarding this consultation is that local body territorial authorities across the country have been instructed to consult with the public on the Water Services Preliminary Arrangements Act. However, the Local Government Water Services Bill currently before Select Committee hasn't passed the final reading, and I'm assuming that determines the final outcome. I attended 2 meetings with the staff when we had the public consultation meetings around the town, and I was told that the 3 collaborative options put forward weren't likely or certain because options have yet to be negotiated and finalised, and there was frustration on both sides as answers to our questions weren't available at that time. And it seemed like, you know, you've been told to consult, but what are we consulting on? Sometimes we're wondering as a public. We were informed that water organisations might be owned by local authorities, council-controlled organisations, or trustees of consumer trusts. And local authorities and trustees of consumer trusts may own a water organisation either as the sole shareholders or as joint shareholders, and a proposed water service organisation's legal ownership of existing ratepayer-funded water services assets and how a transfer of those assets would be made wasn't made clear. So there's a few questions in my head as to who actually does own the assets that ratepayers have paid for years, etc. In its submission to government in February this year, the LGNZ stated that it supports the policy underpinning local water done well, in particular its intentions to retain water assets in local ownership and provide councils with choice in relation to their future delivery of the water services, following consultations with the communities that rely on the service. And I agree with the previous submitter that I also think that Palmerston should retain its services, perhaps a financial organisation could be set up for the purchase of things and also for the raising of funds to assist with the future delivery of the service. Yeah, I think that also locals ought to be able to have a say. And, you know, I was just thinking this morning that all through, you know, since the beginning of mankind, really, and since the beginning of the village culture, I guess, and town culture, people have been in charge of their water supplies. The local people know where the water comes from. They know how important it is to the local community, and to take that out of the local community's hands, in a sense, I don't think, it just doesn't sit with me. And I think that there's still got to be a lot of local input into the service. The options that were presented to the public in the information leaflets, etc., seem to decrease the public's say in our water, because these boards will be appointed, etc. They're another step away from the payers of the scheme, and the payers are, of course, the public. I also note that LGNZ supports the introduction of a new regulatory regime. Also remains concerned about the increased costs that will be borne by councils and households. It's a concern that all ratepayers and residents have. I'm not speaking on behalf of the Palmerston North Residents Group today, but I'm part of the committee of that group, and we did a bit of a survey with the public on this, and they showed a great deal of concern over the rising costs of rates and the unknown costs of water in the future. In both information sessions I attended with staff and councillors, it was stressed that Palmerston North has a good water supply, and I was told that the council's working on upgrading the supply at a steady rate, and I also believe that a new entity would cost a big amount in set-up costs, not to mention compliance to new and unattainable regulations under current conditions. I asked whether the councils or LGNZ had been lobbying central government on this, because I think that central government needs to be lobbied on the regulations on water, which I was told by another council member and staff that they think they're too high. They're putting the bar too high, and they're going to put the country in too much debt because of it. And my suggestion is that a separate entity for water will create more administrative debt. iwi involvement will likely add to that, as demands of further restrictions, agreements and consultants would be required, and that would add to the burden of ratepayers. And I think also it's a case of having to prioritise, and I think water has to be a priority. I've got to say this, is some of the things that council have approved in their spending and their budget, for example, Awapuni Library and Anzac Park edifice, I think should have been put aside in preference to upgrading water, etc., and doing the basics. Thank you for listening.
Thanks, Christine. There are a couple of questions, starting with Councillor Naylor.
Thanks, Christine.
Hello.
You've spoken, it seems you've spoken quite favourably about option 3 in your written submission, and also here today, when you've said that we should retain, you know, Palmerston North should retain our own water services. However, in your submission, when you ranked the options, you ranked option 1 first, and option 2 second, and option 3 third. So I'm just wanting to get some clarity from you about whether your preference is option 3 or whether your
Yeah,
preference.
that was basically if there was no choice. But if there, you know, I mean, I was told by a staff member that there was no choice, that Palmerston North doing it alone was not an option. And I actually didn't really want to make those, you know, put those options. I'm not one for, you know, stating my preferences. My preference is that Palmerston North goes it alone.
Okay,
Yeah.
thank you.
Yeah.
Mr. Chair, could I ask a question of the officers then in terms of how they would interpret?
Thanks. I think that would come in the next item, which
Thank
is
you.
a summary of submissions.
Thank you.
Thanks. Christine, if I can just ask, you indicated that you're part of some community groups, including the ratepayers group, and just kind of, if you thought about how much time and energy was being put into things by those groups, how much, I guess, how much does the water reform kind of dominate that discussion compared to any other civic matters that might be of interest?
Probably is similar, you know, to other items. I think one of the discussions that came up was the quality of the water and also the amount of chlorine and fluoride in it at the moment. Chlorine seems to have increased. Yeah, but other than that, I think we're happy with the quality of water to some degree. It's just the unknown costs of what's coming that I think are the big thing. Yeah.
Understood. Thank you, Christine. And
Thank you.
your submission will be considered alongside all others at the council meeting 7th of May. You're welcome to retain your seat in the gallery.
Thank you.
Our next submitter is Ian Staples, submission number 281. And looks like the microphone's been left on for you, Ian, so you got a head start. Just settle on in, and we're ready when you are. Submission number 281. Thanks, Ian.
Yeah, well, thank you for the opportunity to make a comment on this rushed, or it seems to be a very rushed process. And I just think that, again, you guys have done a lot of work. And I think the elephant in the room means that some of that's going to have to go down the drain, so to speak. So the question is, after my submission I put in, I thought, well, there's a lot of other things going on here, and it's a bit rough. So my comment on my written bit here was, what can I say? Because, and I say that because there's so much involved in all of this that getting one's head around it, and quite frankly, there's not really enough information out in our public arena to be able to do that. And the reason for that is the bill that's going to support this is in the committee stages in Parliament at the moment, and it's not going to come into effect until the 1st of July 2026. Well, that's more than a year ago, so what can you guys really do without that bill becoming a law so that you can actually work with it? Being a bill is one thing, the committee stage is going on, and variations can occur overnight. So, so again, what can I say? Well, I can say that it's been foreshadowed and it's over the top of cost the ratepayers for and it's going to cost more because of inflation. You know, talking about so many million, it'll be more than that because we've got inflation which is almost in control, but it's still over 3%, which means that it's going sort of gangbusters. So I propose that we need an investigation to figure out what ratepayers can actually sustain. And because I think at this stage, we're getting to the stage where there's a lot of people out there already who are having difficulty paying their rates because they're so high. I know I can see the average sort of rates, I think, around about 3,500. And if the possibility of what this program's going to do is another $1,000 a year, well, that's a 33% increase. And that's pretty rough, I think, and it's going to cause a lot of troubles from that point of view. So I would like to see that a situation is that rates get capped to a 2 to 3% annual increase, because if that's the correct inflation rate, that's what it should be, and you guys have to cut your cloth to fit that, which really means that you've got to cut out some things that aren't essentials, because your job, as far as I'm concerned, is the basics of our system, and there's too many boondoggles going on that really nobody can afford. However, boondoggles are okay if those that want them outside of the council pay for them. I'm quite happy with that. And that's really how it should be. You know, the costs should fall where they ought to. A little story. I grew up in the 1950s, and that was after the Second World War, and austerity was the name of the game at that time, because everything we produced went to England, and there was nothing left for us. However, in the 1960s, the dairy boom got underway, and we got to number 3 on the OECD, which was really good, and we did fairly well for those years. And but now I understand that we are on the OECD at about 33, and I reckon that's pretty akin to close to the 1950s. And we need to be very careful, and austerity, I think, is a very good word to be floating around because of that, and again, because of the situation with the ratepayers. It's not good. So this, I've got written here, this gold-plated proposal needs to be pushed back. And I've written, your wonderful LGNZ should be at the Waterbill Committee lobbying vigorously for reduction in standards so that affordable situation can be obtained. And yes, I know the UN and WEF are breathing down your necks, and but we're a sovereign country, and you and the national government should really be batting for us, not for them. And so we've talked about the rates, and what to do is my last question. It's pretty easy. All you councils need to get together and march to the front lawn of Parliament and let them know that the new legislation needs to be written in a way to get this job done in a sustainable way over a longer period of time, and take the fluoride out of the water at the same time. And that'll give you a few extra dollars to spend on something, because that's a terrible thing, and the latest information on that really points that out. So there you go. I've sort of thought about it, and I'm really in the position where this thing is so up in the air at this present time, no real progress can be made because of that until the legislation is settled and what's happening. The legislation, and being in committee, you need to push back on that, and you should be down there doing that, in my opinion. So there you go. That's me. Yeah. Questions?
Thank you, Ian. First question from Councillor Naylor.
Thank you, Ian. You mentioned a little bit in your submission around rates increases and cutting out non-essentials. Have you made a submission to our annual budget process?
That's my job for tomorrow.
Lovely. We'll look forward to that. Thank you.
I've looked at it and been through the document, and I'm disappointed in you guys with the way you don't allow some of these documents to be able to be picked up at the desk. Because I'm a paper right type, I'm way back then, and I like to be able to put a paper and scribble all over it and get my notes organised so that I can see what I'm doing in respect of, because your budget's a complex business, and I dare say there's very few people outside of your council can understand them, but I'm one of those people that dig into those things here. Thanks.
Thank you.
Thanks, Ian. Councillor Zabellan.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. Thanks, Ian. I was just interested in your comments on lobbying in terms of affordability, and under this sort of proposal there's 2 regulators in play, and one of them is charged with keeping costs affordable and regulating that, and the other is charged with the power of directing the level of investment that might be required. And I wondered if you had a view on regulators being able to come in and direct councils or water entities to say this is how much you need to spend.
Yeah, the problem with the council is that the rate paper is called a rate demand for a reason, because you make up the rate and you demand it, and if you don't pay, you take the house off you. And that's how it works. But I think today is a different situation, and we've got, as I say, we're down into the OECD 33 position, which is not a good place to be, and I can't see us getting out of that under the current situation for quite some time. And there's all these other things going, the COVID thing's still hanging around our ears, and that's got to go away. It's time that was put to bed. But coming to the rates cap, you need to understand very carefully how much the ratepayer can afford. And it's not just the owner of a house. The renters have to pay all the insurance, interest, rates, maintenance, and that's got to go into their rent. So when you figure that out, renting is a more expensive deal than buying a house. It's just quite simple like that. But there you go. What else can I say to your question? Got a bit?
Well, I was sort of inquiring about the level of spend could actually be dictated by a regulator rather than by the provider, and whether you had a view on that extra step of direction coming from higher up rather than the entity delivering the service.
Yeah, I don't know. Do we have adequate confidence, Comcom, because they're the ones that are supposed to be overseeing it? And do we have confidence that they can actually do that, particularly if these CCOs get put in place? That's really the question I have about that, and I really should spend time on the typewriter and write my local member a letter.
Right, thank you. Thanks, Ian. Thanks, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Thanks, Ian. That does appear to have cleared the questions from the queue. Thank you again for coming and speaking to your submission, which will be considered on the 7th of May alongside
Yeah,
the
no
others.
problem. It's my duty to do so.
Good to see you. Colleagues, the next submission is number 283 from Malcolm Frith. Malcolm, you, I believe, weren't in the chamber when we introduced this session, but please do take a seat at the table. The format is 10 minutes. It's up to you how you wish to use that in terms of how much you wish to speak to us and how much you wish to field questions. We have read your submission, so you don't need to actually read through it. You're welcome to obviously highlight the main points of emphasis that you'd like to draw to our attention. Thank you for coming in and speaking to us. Looking forward to hearing from you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. One of the things I've heard is from other submitters is the affordability of water for the general person and member of the public. I quite often see the water facility that's provided at Papaua Park, where you can get the bore water for nothing. And it's quite amazing how many people actually utilise that water provided facility. If these kind of options 1 and 2 were installed, obviously they would charge people for that, to take that bore water. Now these are people that might be just visiting our city, or people that literally live in their own vehicles, that's their home. So they have a free, clean source of water which is provided by the city. So I'm not saying that those people don't even contribute, because obviously they may be even working in the city and doing other things, but they still need clean water to live by. We all need water. It's the number one asset in the world right at this moment. Oil is going, or it's not going, but it's not the preferred big thing to buy if you have millions in your bank account. It's actually water. There are people in the world right now buying out water rights. So what deeply concerns me, if we lose control of our water, we not only will be paying and paying and paying, but that money will be going out of our city, out of our country, into the pockets of some rich mogul sitting somewhere else in the world. Our water has been paid for thousands and thousands of times over by the ratepayers of this city of many generations. We have good water here. The city has invested a lot of money in making sure that we do. We have a sewage system which works well. And as far as I'm aware, the only issue for this city is discharge into the Manitou River. Now, you've brought forward a huge sum of money, which you're saying somewhere, I think it's $480 million to fix that one small problem. From what I understand, the discharge is only an issue during summertime when the water levels fall. Now, it's fine to live in an ideological world where everything is perfect and we can all make sure that our back garden and our waterways are 100% pure. But the reality is we've got to all live in this world. We've got to be able to afford to live in this world. I mentioned to a person about the costs of what the city's looking at charging the residents at the moment. And she said to me, how will my father be able to afford to pay that? So the cost, what you're proposing at the moment, is anywhere from $2,000, maybe $4,000 a year, depending on what's set up, etc., to pay for water. So the three waters. But the only issue is the sewage. This option 3, which has a statement, not financially sustainable and therefore is not legally compliant. Who wrote that? So you're saying what we're currently doing doesn't comply, yet we have a high quality water system here in this city, which the residents have invested for many, many years in. So I'd like to ask the person who wrote that, what do they really mean? In option 3, which is shot down, of course, by the other two options, in this document, it actually backs up option 3. The information provided backs up option 3 as being the best option out of the 3 of them. So I really wonder who sits down and writes this stuff, because all the residents got sent out was a little slip of paper, which I didn't bring with me, which said really nothing about what's been proposed. So that's why I might have been a little bit harsh in what I wrote in my submission. But the reality is we've got to live. And the world and this city is becoming unaffordable. Now, Auckland just had a case where they're looking at knocking down a building which the council owns, and it's full of people who live on the street. That's in Auckland. We have a few people that I've met around this city that live on the street, but at least at the moment they have access to clean water. They have public toilets to use. Are we going to charge for our public toilets? We're going to have to, because an external organisation will run it, and you'll have to put your $2 coin in the slot before the door open. Now, in some countries, they've done that for many years, and people accept that. But here, we haven't done that. The option, as I say, about the discharge into the water, we have some very clever people in this city. But I think whoever came up with the price tag of $480 million just to discharge water so it's clean into our river, I'm sorry, that's just way over the top. There's lots of ideas around. We could power a plant which could generate electricity, which could then evaporate the water. There's one simple system. So I think we're really being coerced and pushed into selling off one of the last assets that we actually have left in this city. We lost our electricity, we lost our gas. We were told the price will come down by the minister at the time. It's never come down. You talk to other people that, again, have lived in Auckland when they privatised or semi-privatised their water system there. There's some many, many interesting stories that's unfolded for people who live in Auckland regarding that. So, as I say, it really baffles me that the And again, just listening to some other submitters, that we seem to be pushing this before we even know what's really going on. And I don't think it's the intention of the government to price us all out of existence. What I think the intention of the government is to make the councils accountable to their residents, like they used to be, as to how they spend the residents' money. And as mentioned before, we can have all the greatest buildings in the world, we can have all the greatest water system, but if no one can afford to live here, what's the point? Thank you.
Thanks, Malcolm. There is a couple minutes for questions, starting off with Councillor Naylor.
Thanks, Malcolm. You've talked a lot about affordability. You've also identified option 3 as your preferred option,
Yes.
which is the most expensive one. I'm just wondering how you feel that would be affordable, given it's more expensive than the other options.
Well, the option 3 is the current option we run by, which is funded by rates currently. So we have an annual charge which covers that. So there's not an extension of, like for example here in the other options, it's saying we hand over the asset. Then we're still
Just,
we're still expected to pay more. So we've lost our asset, which obviously, and that's another point, no one's actually put a value on what our asset is worth in this booklet. So what are we handing over to an organisation that doesn't exist yet? But what we're being told is you're going to be paying thousands of dollars a year. Currently, I think the charge is around $400 odd per year for providing water under the general charge. So they're saying this is the expensive option, option 3, but it's the current option and it's working right now. So how can it be the most expensive option? Because the other 2 options, we actually don't know.
Just to clarify, so you prefer us to keep the option 3, but do it for less of a cost than what's been identified, is that correct?
Well, I think this is made up, personally. I think the staff need to really be honest. And what this is obviously based on is the expectation of high water quality. But we already have a very good water quality here. The only issue is the sewage. I'm saying go back to the drawing board on the sewage issue and look at other cheaper options.
Okay.
thank you,
Thank
Malcolm.
you.
That does take us 2 times. We won't be able to get to
sorry.
that question, but appreciate you coming in and speaking to your submission. It will be considered on the 7th of May at the council meeting alongside all other submissions.
Right. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you.
Colleagues, we've had an indication from submitter 159 and submitter 194 that they no longer wish to speak to their submissions. What this means is that we will pause the hearing of submissions at this point and do some reorganization of the agenda so as to continue moving through the business of the committee. So I draw your attention to item number 10, which is around the wastewater treatment plant Nature Calls quarterly update and submission to Te Mata Arawai on draft standards, and ask Mike Monahan, Manager 3 Waters, who I believe is joined online by Anna Lewis, the project manager, to present their report. Thank you, Mike.
Tēnā koutou katoa, ko Mike Monahan te kōingwa. Good morning, councillors, Mr Chair and Your Worship. Happy to present the Nature Calls quarterly update and note the inclusion of the draft response to the National Wastewater Standards. The only point I would make before we open for questions is in section 9 on the budget, I do have the latest figure as at the end of March, and that's 640,865, as opposed to the end of February figures that's included in the report. So that's just a note. And more than happy to open up for questions through you, Mr Chair.
Thank you, Mike. First questions from Councillor Zabellan.
Thank you, Mr Chair. Morena, Mike. I have a few questions just on the draft submission, if that's okay. The first one was at 2.1 in the report. It says the project team have reviewed the draft standards and assessed them in relation to the Nature Calls project. I just wondered, have they been assessed in any other context, like in terms of impact to water bodies or receiving environments, or have we only really looked at them in relation to that particular project?
Yeah, it's a good question. We certainly have looked at them in respect to the Nature Calls project, but we have reviewed the standards overall, and the wider submission that we presented sort of gives our reflection of how the draft standards kind of affect the whole of the wastewater industry. We've also tried to come at it from a wider New Zealand perspective as well as just PNCC.
Great, thank you. And see what I've written. On page 61, you have noted the lack of activity status for consenting discharges of wastewater to water and to land, and that our comment there is that it gives the regulator quite wide-ranging discretion in processing those consent applications. The note there is that the activity status of the discharge would be determined by the relevant regional plan, and this might be a bit hypothetical, but in looking at the blueprint that's been set out for the new RMA system, or the NEA, it indicates that there'd be one regulatory plan per region with no more regional policy statements, and that would be quite a templated environment. So in that context, the regional plan might not be so prescriptive, and I wondered if we could thought about using some stronger language in terms of that misalignment with the RMA as it is now, and where it's going to be in a year or 2 years, and whether or not that should be locked down a bit clearer in the standards.
So there's two responses, Councillor. The first one is absolutely, these are draft responses, and that's why we've brought them today to consider elected members' input. So we do have time to make changes, absolutely. And them changes would then be submitted under the CE's delegation, because there wouldn't be time to bring it back to chambers. But luckily, I've got my expert planner online to answer the more substantive question. So I don't know, Anna, if you caught on, you could respond. Thank you.
Yes. Kia ora koutou. Yeah, that's a really good question. I guess in terms of, and your earlier question was a good one too, about looking at this broader than Nature Calls. So just first part of it, from a Nature Calls perspective, you know, we are progressing based on, you know, instruction by council on working on a BPO. So the first answer is an activity status in relation to the draft standards will be very relevant for that particular project. So draft standards are due, final standards are due back mid-August this year. So in relation to Nature Calls, we do need to kind of look at it in terms of that context, because the RMA amendments won't have happened. But certainly we can add additional information in regards to the proposed RMA amendments. It's obviously any amendment to the RMA is going to be long-term coming, and that's on a much different duration, but no, we can certainly add something along that line if you'd like.
Oh, thank you. And just sort of in line with that as well, we have raised points relating to the overflow management, which would be classified as a controlled activity. And in my read of the blueprint for the RMA's replacement, they're reducing activity categories down to 4, and controlled activities won't be one of those. So I wondered in terms of whether that or not they're putting the cart before the horse and saying, here's the standards and here's the activity classes, or not, but then we're going to roll out replacement spatial planning acts and natural environment acts that don't even include the categories that they're assigning. I wondered if there had been any, I know it's sort of hypothetical, but whether there's any thought to that kind of perceived misalignment, and whether we could feed that back in the submission as well.
Mike, I can start with that if you like.
Yes.
Yeah, I think that's a good point. I do. The draft standards and the alignment with the RMA amendments weren't particularly well articulated. And I think, of course, the speed of which these things are happening together and how they join back up. So whether or not they will have considered that for the final standard will be interesting to see. Again, RMA amendments will be a long time in terms of they're actually implemented. But yes, certainly we're going to end up, in its current wording, would end up with a standard that is referring to an activity status that the RMA might not talk about any further. So joining those up will be an important part of it. So yes, we can certainly include that as well.
Cool, thank you. And I just had one more, which was about the omission of cumulative effects in the scope. And I've indicated that that might be something for future standards, but also looking at the potential imposition of environmental caps and limits for air and water, soil and ecosystems. And if we're only required to sort of do an end of pipe assessment and not any monitoring or in-stream impacts, whether or not with a 35-year term for consents we might be locking in potentially a decline in the water quality that would, if there's caps in place, might actually shift the burden of freshwater management disproportionately onto farmers, for example, and having to manage that national cap. And yeah, whether we could put anything in there about having to sort of think about cumulative effects in this round of the standards rather than later on, because there are potential downstream effects, so to speak.
Yeah, it's thank you, Councillor. That's a good question, and I think it sort of highlights the complexity of the whole environment at the moment. We do nod towards that in section 4 of the feedback about the lack of information on cumulative effects within the new standards, and we do note that end of pipe standards are specified. I think when you take it as a whole, that they do talk about the receiving environment and the sensitivity of a number of receiving environments from a water perspective, from from very sensitive receiving environments through to open ocean, and they have tried to work that into end of pipe standards. But yeah, we can certainly strengthen the argument about the cumulative effect if that's what council desires to do.
Oh, I suppose it's not a question, but that would be good if we could. Thank you. Thanks, Mike.
Thanks. The next questions are from Councillor Hancock.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Mike and Anna. Just very quickly, just in terms of, there'll be significant submissions, I guess, to Taumata Arawai in terms of the standards. So I'm just curious just around sort of the, I suppose, the expected timeline of any sort of decisions that will come out of that, and how that might in fact actually impact our Nature Calls project.
Yeah, thank you through the chair. That's really something that we've been grappling with. The timeline that we're expecting the finalised standards is round about early August. That's what we've been told, and you've picked up on a really good point there, that does introduce quite a large amount of risk for our decision making going forward for Nature Calls. So we're going to be bringing all these questions to you in a workshop in a couple of weeks' time, where we can sort of have a bit more of a deeper dive into some of those sort of technical aspects. But yes, you're quite right. It does mean that we're moving forward with the risk of not knowing what the final standards will be until early August. Hope that answers your question.
Great. That sets the conundrum in good context. Thanks, Mike.
Thanks. Can I just follow up on that, Mike, in terms of your understanding of whether those final standards are likely to speak to hybrid discharges, or will we still be in a situation where we're trying to read the tea leaves between the two individual standards, one around discharge to water and one around discharge to land?
Yeah, we've put a very strong submission in about the lack of the addressing of that hybrid discharge. We've been quite explicit that it doesn't speak to a situation like Palmerston North, where we may wish to do some land discharge and some river discharge, and the difference in those two standards. So yeah, who knows what the final standards will say, but the current standards do not speak to that.
Councillor Naylor.
Thank you. My question relates to the area on risk on page 53, and particularly the very high risk there that's ratepayer affordability. The bottom bullet point under mitigations talks about the BPO selection weightings to be adjusted, and I recall in the previous MCA cost was only given a 10% weighting, and I'm just wondering if that's to be adjusted, what weighting is the the affordability or the cost going to be given to that?
Thank you, Councillor. So at this stage, when we bring you the information of the options, the long list of options to the workshop, the three categories that we've applied so far are cost, and the threshold that Councillor have set us quite clearly of the $480 million. That's one of the thresholds. The other one is, do they meet the new draft wastewater standards? And the third one is about the original project objectives that the elected members set during the last round of the BPO. So we've only applied those three standards at this point for the long list, and we'll have a further discussion how you wish to apply any more weightings in our workshop when we get to it in a couple of weeks' time.
So those three aspects, have they been given equal weighting? Like, is that a third, a third, a third? Or?
At this stage, Council, we've simply given them like a traffic light status, you know, red, green and amber. Green means, yes, it reaches that threshold, and amber means there's some risk, and red means it doesn't meet that threshold. So, for example, if we just take the cost, if we've got options that are above that 480 million, that's flagged very clearly as a red light for you, for just for ease of going through that long list of options. But we haven't got down to an MCA process at this stage.
Haven't got down to an MCA process?
To doing a deeper MCA process.
Is that expected to be a part of the process going forward?
I think we'll discuss that with the elected members. That'll probably be your decision.
Okay. And just, you referred to the budget of 480 million. Is it well understood that that is meant to be an up to 480 million budget?
Yeah, that's very clear to us, Councillor.
Yeah.
But what we're intending to do is bring you, as you instructed us, to go and consider the long list of options and any new options. And we're intending to bring you all of those options to the workshop, but very clearly articulate which ones fit within or below that 480 million and which ones currently sit above that, so that you've got full transparency of all those options.
And how many options at this stage fit under that threshold?
Oh gosh, I've not got that in front of me. It's probably a handful, maybe 4 or 5.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Johnson.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. Thanks, Mike and Anna. And my questions just relate to the submission on the wastewater standards. I know in the conclusion that we've said in the submission that future iterations should consider, and then there's a list, future iterations should consider relationships with iwi. Does that mean that there's no consideration of relationships with iwi in the current wastewater standards?
Councillor, I think it's my knowledge that Taumata ROI have engaged quite heavily with iwi. I'm just not clear about how extensively across the whole country, or whether it was just certain iwi groups that they engaged with.
So our submission is relatively silent then on the role that we see for iwi in the wastewater standards?
So iwi have made it clear to us that they're going to be putting their own submission in to Taumata ROI. But again, we can take your advice if you'd wish us to strengthen that argument.
I guess I'll make comment in a moment. But do you, in advance of that comment, is there still a chance to make some amendments to this submission?
Yes, we're definitely running out of time with Easter, and it's due back on the 24th, but we do have time to make some changes. We just wouldn't have time to bring them back to chambers.
Okay. I'll just leave it there for now then. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Thanks, Mike. A couple of questions from me. First, just from an overall point of view, can you just comment on how we're getting on with actually the refresh of the BPO in terms of looking ahead, the timeline and the major time touch points in that? And
yeah, it certainly is a challenge, Councillor. We do have a timeline that brings us to a couple of workshops and a council paper to get us to a short list of options. We're still at a long list stage now, but to get us to a short list. And then we'll be bringing that timeline to councillors in a paper on the 7th of May, I think, for you to make a decision on whether or not you believe that timeline is achievable to get us to a selected option in this term of council.
great, thank you. A couple of questions just around the draft submission as well. The first one, Mike's in the introduction, we referred to the standards enhancing environmental outcomes. And I'd just like to know kind of your view on what the main assurances are that we can offer to the community around these standards actually delivering on enhanced environmental outcomes.
Yeah, I think I spoke earlier to Councillor Zeblin about the new standards have taken into account the sensitivity of the receiving environment and set the standards at end of pipe, as we've already noted, set the standards at end of pipe accordingly. So I think, you know, speaking sort of from a PNCC perspective, the receiving environment for us would be classed as the low dilution. Yeah, I think we'd start off at the medium, and we discussed this a couple of weeks ago at the last workshop, but we'd very quickly move into the low dilution. So to achieve those nutrient limits at the low dilution, we would certainly be vastly improving the current discharge from the current treatment plant. It would be a step change. So we could give some guarantees that we would be having a positive impact compared to what we currently do.
Thanks. I guess what I'm trying to understand is how in those kind of low, medium, high dilution environments, there doesn't seem to be any reference to the actual existing state of that receiving environment. And so there's a vast difference between a river that's already quite polluted and adding a bit more to it versus one that's, quite unpolluted. So how can the standards actually give us an assurance of improved environmental outcomes if we're not actually considering the state of the receiving environment beyond just the dilution factor?
I think that's a nod back to the conversation around the cumulative effects. And you're right in that the current standards don't speak to cumulative effects, but the improvement in wastewater treatment technologies and improvement in standards will give an improved environmental outcome. It's how you measure that, I suppose, with the state of the existing environment.
So, I mean, is the process kind of wrong way around then in terms of looking at locking down a process before we actually look at how we address cumulative effects?
I think we're responding to regulatory framework here. The Taumata ROI will set the standards and for the country, and we need to sort of give our best feedback to them before they do that. So we're more than happy to do that.
Thank you. Finally, for me, just around the concluding paragraph, there's a statement in there that talks about balancing environmental outcomes with practical implementation. And I guess my reading of that kind of suggests that you're wanting to say that practicality and environmental outcomes are kind of trade-offs that we have to think about. Are they always trade-offs, or are there kind of win-win versions of that we could actually try to achieve?
Yeah, I think the latter. I think what the standards are attempting to do is to, I think I referred earlier to the fact that there's about 70% of wastewater consents are due to expire across New Zealand in the next 10 years. So how do we practically move forward with an affordable solution for the country whilst also giving the best outcomes sort of at end of pipe, as these standards suggest? And I think if you're talking about a trade-off, that might be that compromise is an affordability for the country question versus best environmental outcomes.
Great. Thank you, Mike. Appreciate that. There don't appear to be any further questions in the queue, so thanks to you. Thanks to Anna as well. Colleagues, that brings us to consideration of the recommendations, of which there are two. The first, that the committee receive the report titled Wastewater Treatment Plant Nature Calls Quarterly Update, presented to the Sustainability Committee 16 April 2025. And secondly, that the committee note the matters to be included in the submission on the draft National Wastewater Standards, which I'm happy to move, seconded by Councillor Zeblin, and we'll open up for comments, starting with Councillor Johnson.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. Just a brief comment from me that I would hope that any submission that we made in this regard would reflect the partnership that we have with iwi here in Palmerston North, and that comments around involvement and relationship with iwi would be included in the current, as a recommendation for the current draft, not just mentioned in a list in the conclusion as something that might be considered in future, because I think it's very important that those things are considered in the present. And if the submission, for the submission to be altered to include current position as a council, working in partnership with iwi, then I think that that should be included as part of our submission, and hopefully that's not anything that anybody else would object to. I'll look for guidance from staff if that needs to be included as a separate amendment.
Who on staff would like to take that?
Sorry, this is a little bit embarrassing, but can you please repeat the question?
Well, it's not really a question. It's a comment. My comment is that any submission that we make on wastewater standards should include a reflection of our current kawanata with Rangatane and our position that iwi relationships with iwi should be important in the establishment of wastewater standards going forward, and not only, as it would seem to me, to be relegated to being part of a list of things that could be considered in the future in our conclusion. So, given that comment, I'm wondering if staff feel that you would need an amendment to include that, or whether the comment could just be taken under advice.
Yeah, looks like Chris is going to answer that question.
Thank you. Through you, Mr. Chair, Chris Dobbick, GM Infrastructure, we'll take that on board. Yes.
Okay, I'll leave it there then. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Zabelin.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. I thank you for the report. I just wanted to say thanks to the team. It's really great news that the biosolids interim strategy is in fact within the current consent. So well done on that piece of work. That's a small piece of certainty amongst all that change. And it's great to see that we're just able to just get on with it. And also thanks for the work on the submission. That's a very complex bit of work and sort of leading, I think, in the way Taumata Arawai have given specific areas or questions for feedback. But I think that we've achieved good coverage, notwithstanding. It would be great to see some greater emphasis given to the misalignment between various processes. And I was noting that if Taumata Arawai are issuing 35-year consents for wastewater discharge, but Horizons are issuing consents for discharge to air, for example, they can't issue those for the same length of time. So for the Nature Calls project, we'd have multiple regulators, multiple processes, and multiple timeframes of expiry. So having a stronger comment on the greater need for integration and alignment of those processes in order to be as efficient as they're hoping to be, that would be great. And the importance of the cumulative effects being considered in the scope now and not later to avoid other parties being disproportionately impacted by these and other standards would be very helpful too. I do think that they have put the cart before the horse in many of the respects, and there'd be some unintended consequences from those misalignments. So I would like us to make note of those in our submission with some stronger language. But thank you so much. That's a really short space of time to turn around a very complex analysis. I think you've done a great job. Thanks.
Thank you, Councillor. Moving online to the Deputy Mayor for comment.
Tēnā koe, Mr. Chair. Hopefully you can hear me.
Yeah, loud and clear.
Oh, ka pai, ngā mihi ki a koutou. I just want to support what Councillor Johnson has said, because I would hate to see us lost how we operate, what our values, if we don't put that in about our relationship with iwi. I think that's something that we're exemplary with if we look across the nation, and I would hate to see that we don't get that in the submission, and making a very strong point. I'm very much aligned with what Councillor Johnson and Councillor Zabelin had just mentioned as well. Nō reira, tēnā koutou. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor. Just a final comment for me then. Firstly, really appreciate the work that officers and consultants have been putting on to continue to advance the nature calls consent. It is one of the city's key strategic projects and made all the more challenging by the rapidly changing times in water services management. So do appreciate the hard work going on there. Very keen to see the short list and conclude the revisit of the BPO, if at all possible, within the term of council. Do acknowledge that some of those factors are well outside of the control in this room, but certainly hope that we can get there. Just a few comments as well on the draft submission. Do appreciate the work that officers have done on that and concur with comments made so far from the three colleagues who have. I think first would be to acknowledge that really these standards have been born out of situations like ours. Like we are now about 8 years and about $12 million into a process, and we still have a lot of uncertainty in front of us. So absolutely there is a case for looking at ways to be more effective and efficient in terms of development of standards and development of consents, and noting, as officers have said, the tremendous number that are coming through as a country. Having said that, I am concerned that the way that Te Mata Arawa is consulting on these does bypass some quite fundamental issues. The most fundamental of those is that when our river's in low flow, it's already in many cases too polluted. So even a little bit more pollution is actually a bit too much. And as drafted, these standards appear to be quite blind to that. They are talking about simply flow levels, whether it is low, medium, or high flow, rather than actually looking at the diffuse and non-point sources of pollution that have come into a waterway that would also contribute to a decision about whether or not there was capacity within the receiving environment. So really appreciate the officers for making a good start on this. 11 pages of draft submission, good going. And there's some really good stuff in there around advocating for adaptive management, around technology and innovation, around evolving community expectations, around the need for standards for hybrid discharges, obviously such as ours, and for addressing challenges like persistent pollutants. So there's a lot of good things in there, but I do feel that this draft submission does need to be strengthened in terms of getting the decisions right around cumulative effects and giving the community confidence in an overall framework that contributes to continuing to improve the overall state of the Manawatu River and other lowland rivers throughout New Zealand. And I think this is where the process has gotten a bit back to front. In my view, Te Mata Arawa would have been better to have a consultative process to talk about outcomes and then follow up with a consultative process to talk about process. But what we've got is process and the absence of outcomes. And that's potentially quite dangerous because you can get into a situation where you're being very clear, very concise, very efficient, but you may actually not be heading in the direction that you want to head in. And I think there's an element of risk there in the way that these are being set down. So do greatly appreciate, again, officers' work on this. I think the submission does need to be strengthened around the cumulative effects, around acknowledging that there's diffuse sources of pollution that are also impacting on the state of the river, and to make sure that we have an overall package that gives us, in my view, the best mix of good environmental outcomes and more efficient process so that we can continue to ensure that our community aspirations are being responded to in terms of the health of the river and delivery of water services and wastewater treatment. So with that, seeing no further comments, I'll call for a vote. And we have a vote, 13 in favor, none against. Colleagues, we'll pause now for tea, come back at 10:40, 20 to 11. And for those members of the public that are here and here to give your submissions, shortly thereafter there is an urn and some tea and coffee in the link span just outside the door, which you're welcome to take advantage of. We'll be reconvening at 10:40. Thank you. Kia ora, colleagues. Welcome back to the resumption of Sustainability Committee meeting, 16th of April, 2025. Welcome to members of the public who are joining us as well. We will now resume the hearing of submissions, which we paused earlier. We have 3 additional submissions, and I believe the submitters are with us here, so looking forward to hearing from you all in due course. So just for those submitters who were not here at the start of the meeting, just to reiterate the process around this, you'll have 10 minutes for your submission, and that is inclusive of the time for questions. So it's up to you how you want to use that time, and to the extent to which you would like to respond to any questions that elected members might have, as well as emphasizing the main points of your submission. So we have read your submissions, and the opportunity here is for you to emphasize the main points and to help us be drawn to those. Just to remind submitters as well, we do have standards around language used in the chamber here, and don't expect to hear any offensive language during the course of speaking to submissions. In terms of logistically how this works, there's some microphones arranged at the far end of the table here. On those microphones, if you push the right-hand button, that will turn the microphone on. It will be then with a red light. Red means go in this case, and so you'll have the microphone on at that stage and be able to speak into the microphone for much of the 10 minutes as you should choose to. Hopefully that is clear for submitters, and we will now move to submission number 188, which is Mr. John Bent. John, you're welcome to take up a seat at the table. To settle yourself in, activate the microphone, and we look forward to hearing from you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Councillors, as I said, I pre-circulated the oral component to you to maximise the time for questions, which I hope you have some. And just on the last page, I refer to the sale of assets and cutting costs. I will go in greater detail into that when it comes to this purported consultation on the annual budget. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm now open to questions.
Thank you, John. Question from Councillor Naylor.
Hi, John. Thanks for your submission. Just want to, you've identified in your submission that you support option 3. You've also raised some concerns around the costs. Given that option 3 is the most expensive option, I'm just wanting to understand from you how, what your level of comfort is around option 3, if that in fact is more expensive for ratepayers.
That, looking at timelines, will become a function for the new council, is simply to go through the long-term plan and chop things out so you stay. I forget which section it is in the Local Government Act. It was a former councillor and another councillor who pointed me to it, about financial responsibility, whatever it's termed in the Act. In other words, you're going to have to cut in order to pay for it. And another element of that, when you have been considering our sewage discharge, which I mentioned in my submission that was put before you just this week, you have grossly underestimated the costs and what is involved. To illustrate, one, sewage from Levin had been going into Lake Horowhenua. That consent has just been renewed, and it is entirely 100% to land, as are 3 out of the 5 in Horowhenua, and New Zealand, Palmerston North needs to meet that standard.
Just to clarify, so you're saying some of the costs in option 1 have been underestimated and some of the other options have been underestimated?
No. The costs in option 1 are unrealistic. By the way, I do not believe 4 councils you prefer in option 1 will actually join.
Okay.
Councillor Zabellin.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. Good morning, John. At paragraph 8, you have said there that you put it to us it's neither ethical or moral or equitable to impose our costs on others and continue harming the environment. I wondered what's your view on willing partners if we attracted some? Did you have a view about partnerships with a willing partner who'd come to the table and didn't view that as an imposition?
Yes, as long as they were made fully aware of the risks. And those I've just tried to explain there and previously, Councillor Naylor, is that people have not been made fully aware of the risks involved just with the sewerage in Palmerston North. And by the way, on that, most of the problem is not the sewerage. That's not the problem. It's the inflow and infiltration that is the problem, because the pipes are just simply taking in too much other water. That is the real problem to be addressed. And here I will note, in recent times, the Environment Court has approved conditions instructing councils to deal with the issue. Thank you.
Thank you. So you'd say free and frank disclosure, complete disclosure of all that information would be imperative before you'd have comfort with a collaboration between councils?
Yes, so that it would enable all people who, submitters, especially submitters, but or potential submitters, to make an informed submission. I believe, as I mentioned before, the support information does not allow you to make an informed decision with regard to this budget, and the same, I believe, applies here.
Thank you. Thanks very much, Mr. Chair.
Delore, thank you. John, that concludes questions. Appreciate your submission. It will be considered on the 7th of May at the council meeting alongside the 288 other submissions received. Our next submission is submission number 195 from Janet Dara. Janet, do take a seat. Looks like the microphone's been left on for you very conveniently, and you may introduce yourself and the gentleman beside you, and we look forward to hearing your submission. Thank you.
Good morning, everyone. Tēnā koutou. Thank you for giving me the opportunity to speak to my submission on water service changes today. So I'm Janet Dara. I'm retired now, but I've had a career in the disability and mental health services sector, supporting families and individuals. I'm really wanting to comment on my concern about how the increased costs brought about by the new water services being separate to our rates and added on to our rates will affect our community. The cost of living's risen substantially, but wages and benefits have not. My concern is that this will impact people who are currently already under considerable financial strain. Water is a basic human need, and people who struggle should not be penalised or lose services because they can't pay. A parent with young children or a caregiver of a person with a disability, or anyone really, cannot do their job without water. What I'm hoping is that council will keep in mind that people who have to, say, miss a water payment due to a medical emergency or need to cover a larger financial commitment do not get their debt increased by additional fees to their rates. because that just compounds the problem. That built into the water bill payment system will include flexibility and compassion for people who struggle financially and who may get behind or be unable to meet the payments. We're currently facing a lot of challenges in New Zealand, having enough housing for people in our communities. I've been a landlord in my work life and personal life, and I know as rates increase, so must rents. I'm concerned that for some individuals, higher rents and other rising costs they face could make the difference between affording accommodation and being homeless. Rent rises over time may lead to more homelessness and to overcrowding, thereby putting further strain on our community social services and health services. Because option 3 was in the pamphlet that came out, was deemed to be not viable, I was supporting option 1 of the proposed changes because that is seems to be more affordable and more local of the 2 viable options presented. I prefer a smaller number because although I don't know how people will get along, I do feel a larger group will find it trickier to reach consensus, and they'll have opposing needs and come from very different communities, so there may be some potential difficulties there. A smaller group will be nearer us geographically and much more likely to reflect the true needs of our local community. In conclusion, I want you to be, as a council, mindful that payment options are affordable to those who struggle in our community, for the vulnerable, that water is a basic human need and should be available to all, and option 1 is my preferred option. Thank you, ngā mihi.
Thank you, Janet. Appreciate that. Couple questions here. Firstly, from Councillor Naylor.
Thanks, Janet. 2 questions from me. You talked about the impact on people who are under financial strain and wanting to see some sort of system whereby they are not, you know, financially compromised if they're not able to pay. If there was some sort of hardship fund to accommodate what you're suggesting, where would you suggest that that money be funded from?
I would think that in cases where people are struggling, that perhaps they could be referred to WINS as one idea, because that's the logical place for, and also perhaps to social services in our community. Yeah, that's all I can think of as a solution. There are budgeting services, etc., but sometimes it's not budgeting that's needed, it's just more money to cover the bills that they're facing because of the rise in the cost of living.
Thank you. And my second question relates to your preferred option being option 1. Then when you've written down under option 3, you've said that the current system seems to have been working well, and you've verbally also talked about the fact that option 3 has been deemed to not be viable.
Yeah.
How much, in your decision making about the preferred option, how much of has been influenced by when you've considered option 3 by the fact that it has been determined to not be viable?
How much? Sorry, I'm not clear what you're asking.
Sorry. So you've chosen option 1 as your preferred option.
Yeah.
And then you've talked favourably in your comments about option 3.
Yeah.
And you've mentioned verbally that you recognise that it's
not
been
viable.
identified
It's
as
deemed
not
to
viable.
Yeah, because legislation means that you're not able to borrow large amounts. Yeah.
So if option 3 was viable, would that have
Yeah, I would
changed?
be swayed. Yes, I would prefer that because I've lived here for 50 years and I think that, well, nearly 50. And I think that, you know, for all that time, we've, our councils that have managed really well, managed the water services and services generally very well. Okay. So, yeah.
Okay, thank you very much.
I only went that way because it says it's simply not viable at the
Okay.
moment. Yeah.
Thanks for the clarification.
Great, thanks, Janet. There is a further question just here from Councillor Isabellan.
Thank you.
Thanks, Janet. You noted in your submission that government assistance should be that government should be assisting councils with the cost of safe water, and I wondered if you had a view on how that would look in an ideal world. What sort of funding might we get?
Oh, you mean in actual figures?
Or in an arrangement?
In an arrangement? Well, I kind of wonder, with whichever one we go with, that because the costs, you know, tend to increase over time. I'm just thinking of other big projects that have been around, that it may be that some councils need to be assisted in meeting their costs and repaying their loans, because it's a huge amount of money for individuals, for families to come up with, for ratepayers. And yeah, in an ideal world, it'd be nice if would have some part in supporting clean water particularly, but affordable water for everyone. Yeah, because it's such a basic human need. Yeah, so it's different from power and some of the things like phone and etc. It's like the air we breathe.
Yeah. Is that something you'd like to see us communicating to the government or pushing back on more? Do you think we've got a role to push for a better outcome?
I think that would be worth putting to them, that down in the course of time, because costs do tend to balloon, blown out, that and because people get behind in their rates and struggle to pay, that there should be some government funding.
Thank you. Thanks very much. Thanks, Mr. Chair.
Thanks. Janet, just if I can follow up
Sorry.
briefly. Really interested in your comments around protection and compassion for people of lesser means in terms of dealing with all this. So if we did end up in a future system where there were water meters that were charging per volume of use, have you turned your mind to what kind of protections would be appropriate in that kind of system for people? Typical examples are that there's a free allocation and then the charge kind of kicks in after you've kind of used a certain volume or something to ensure that the basics are there. Would that sort of solution be acceptable?
I think that certainly, and people with children, people with disabilities. I think looking at people who are disadvantaged, definitely, there needs to be some system, and I like that idea that there's a certain amount to begin with that is cost-free, and then you pay after you've reached a certain limit, perhaps. I mean, that's one way, but I don't know technically how a meter could work in that way. I don't know anything about that.
Understood on that.
Yeah, just being a little bit flexible about that, thinking about that, yeah, and not compounding people's debt by adding late fees and other kinds of percentages.
Understood.
Yeah, thank you.
Understood. Thank you, Janet.
Thank
That
you
does
very much.
conclude our time, so your submission will be considered on the 7th of May at the council meeting. And that moves us to our final submission, which is submission number 252 from Brett Hill. Looks like Brett's already at the table as well. You'll just want to swap which microphone's on. Brilliant. Looking forward to hearing from you, Brett. Thanks.
Greetings, ngā mihi kia koutou. My name is Brett Hill, as you know. I'm a Palmerston North residential ratepayer. The most important thing to say for me, first and foremost today, is that even if the council's preferred option for local water done well is the best of the worst for us affordability-wise, it's still going to hit our household and many others very hard financially, simply because most of us in our circles are already struggling financially. And that's because most of us are working poor, people with disabilities, and more of us will be on fixed incomes like pensions. Realistically, this side of magic, most of us are just most of us just aren't going to be able to come up with the extra $40.38 per week or $2,100 per year within the next 10 years to pay for the council's preferred option, especially when it will be on top of what we will be already paying PNCC and Horizons for their rates and whatever other increases may occur for those rates, and everything else that increases over that time which households have to pay for. Well, I'm relieved to hear from Place Source that most councillors genuinely are aware of such frightening circumstances which households like ours are facing. That's not going to help us find what, for many of us, is the huge and unattainable amount of money to cover all that. So I can only anticipate that with so few signs of things improving for many people anytime soon, there's going to be a lot of people massively struggling to pay their rates. And gravely, some will start to default on their rate payments through no fault of their own. And because of that, a lot more people will be paying very close attention to the following. Firstly, what councillors prioritise spending council money on in the upcoming budget. Secondly, people will be paying very close attention to the upcoming elections. Thirdly, people will continue to pay very close attention to every budget and every election going forward from there. And finally, in these hard times like we're facing, there will be a lot more people thinking that council spending on anything beyond the absolute basics, anything beyond what is absolutely necessary, like rubbish collection, and anything beyond maintaining other basic services we already have is going to just be an unaffordable nice to have. And that such things are just going to have to wait until our households magically get that extra money we don't have and can't get to pay for it all. Thank you for your time.
Thanks, Brett, and this has attracted a few questions. Firstly, Councillor Johnson, just here.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. Thanks, Brett, for coming in and talking to us. I wondered if you were clear on why it is that council is proposing to make changes to water services.
My understanding, there's been a collective challenge across for various reasons, not specifically this one, but for various reasons for not spending enough money on such things as the three waters over time. And it's not sexy, it's hard to win elections if you're standing up for things that people can't easily see or grasp hold of. And over time, yes, it's the chickens have come home to roost, and the central government has been driving things to make sure that these things are addressed. Who gets to foot the bill, whose books does it go on, has been a big problem for central government and for local government. And my understanding from there is that there's been this drive to get some collective action, whether it's national or Labour and who's driving it from a central government perspective, who's going to get to have it on their balance sheets. And the best I can understand is that they've come up with this idea of collective councils, regional bodies, etc., joining together where they can to get a collective response to paying for that funding. Hence, we've got the three options that we've got in front of us for this exercise that we're making the submission for. Hence, the council's gone for option number one. My reading of it is the best of the worst things, affordability-wise, etc., that they can cobble together to try and make this thing work, that they've had foisted upon them to a certain extent by circumstances, history, and by central government.
Okay, so you recognise that this is a central government policy that we're responding to, not something that we've initiated because we think it's a good idea. Okay.
But you guys are the sharp end of delivery to us, is my point, yeah.
And are you aware of the changes in water standards that are coming, and some of which have come already? So wastewater standards, drinking water standards, etc., and regulation?
Not in fine detail, I will admit, but in broad strokes, yes.
Okay. And are you aware of the levies that we as a council will be required to pay to government to fund these things?
Once again, not in the finer detail, but broadly speaking, yeah.
Okay, well, just for your information, it's more than $500,000 a year. Okay, I'll leave it to others, thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Hancock.
Yeah, thanks, Mr. Chair, and thanks, Brett. And you actually just touched on, I think, some of the things which I was interested in, and it's really just around. So you're acutely aware of, obviously, that the cost of this local water done well actually is falling on ratepayers.
Yeah.
Do you have any direct views in terms of central government's role in actually paying for some of this?
Oh, well, I'm not an expert on politics or finances and all that kind of stuff, but I have thought about that quite a bit. And I'm just thinking that in my closer to ideal world, maybe, say, loans could be done over a longer period. Yeah, you pay more ultimately, but you pay less as you go along in yearly instalments. And, you know, it's very easy to say, oh, you know, central government should pay for everything, or council should pay for everything. I'm not saying that at all. I'm saying that as a ratepayer, I'm just bloody concerned, like a lot of people are, that there's a potential for a lot of people to be defaulting, not through any mismanagement, but just because of their circumstances. All of a sudden, they've got this extra cost, which is over and above their ability to pay.
Yep, thank you, Brett.
Thank you.
Mr. Chair.
Councillor Naylor.
Yeah, thanks, Brett. You've expressed really clearly your concerns around rates, affordability and spending, and how that will hit households very hard.
Yeah.
I was wondering, have you made a submission to our annual budget process?
Yeah, I have, yeah.
Lovely. We'll look forward to that. Thank you.
Me too. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Brett. That has cleared the queue of questions. Appreciate you speaking to your submission and responding to questions. As I've said to others, your submission will be considered on the 7th of May in the council meeting alongside all others. Thank you to Janet as well for staying alongside for mutual support. You're both welcome to resume your seat in the gallery at this stage.
Thanks, folks.
Colleagues, that draws to a close the hearing of submissions around local waters done well, and moves us forward to the next item on our agenda, which is the summary submissions of around local water done well, and would ask Olivia Wicks, Manager Communications, Mike Monahan, Manager Three Waters, and Julie Keane, the Transition Manager, to share the report with us.
Good morning again, councillors, and thank you for receiving this summary of submissions report today. Look, I just wanted to open, which we don't get to do very often as staff, is just to thank elected members for the hard work that we've all put in over the last few weeks. You know, there's been a number of occasions where we've had multiple drop-in sessions and sector engagement sessions happening at the same time, and it's been quite a big effort from everybody to get out and to engage. So a big thank you to the staff and also to you elected members for that work. We had some really good engagement levels with people in all the face-to-face meetings. We had some really good conversations, as well as a couple of challenging conversations, which we expected. And I'm going to hand over to the team now just to take us through at a very high level what this summary of submissions looks like. Thank you.
Good morning. We just wanted to first touch on, I guess, the significance of the engagement that we did. So it was similar in scale to what we would do for a long-term plan, which we believe recognises the significance of the decision you're making. What we're starting to see around the country now is most councils are just putting it in their annual budget, and so we actually feel quite confident in the I guess the engagement that we've done with our community, so that it is a standalone issue for our public. As you know, we've done a heck of a lot over the last couple of months. We attended a lot of events, We had a pool party, we had sector sessions, we workshopped with a class at St. Peter's, we had a number of community sessions and heaps of drop-in sessions that you all attended as well. And over that period, we think we probably spoke in the high thousands of people. We did have a broad demographic representation in our submissions and also just in the people we spoke to. In the end, we ended up with 292 submissions, but we would just note that one of those submissions represents the views of just under 20 high school students, and and we also have group submissions in there as well. We've also received submissions from iwi, and that is separate to the 292 number.
Kia ora tātou, Julie Keane, Transition Manager. Just building on the themes that we've already outlined in the report to you, just at a very, very high level, because obviously the next report that comes to you is the key decision report, and there will be a lot more detail obviously to outline in that report. But I think just generally speaking, and probably in line with a number of the speakers this morning that you've heard, there is still quite a lot of confusion. There is still a lot of people who probably wish that the independent business unit versus the CCO model is a key thing for consideration, and that will come through in the document, in the report that comes through next month. From an engagement point of view, as Liv has already said, we thought that it was really well received by the community. There is some, again, that level of confusion that we can't get away from. One of the speakers earlier talked about that legislation having not been passed, so that's where some of this complication comes from, as you're fully aware of. In the graphs that you have been handed out in your one-pager, you'll see what the general themes were around people wanting to support a collaborative model. So option 1 has come out as the resounding option support from the submissions that we have received. A variation around which councils submitters wish us to work with. Manawatu and Horowhenua have come out on top in that regard, but also Tararua has been quite highly supported as well. Again, there'll be more detail to come. Consistent water services was the highest themed value that came through in the submissions, with 230 submitters supporting that, closely followed by the affordability and cost value, which is sitting at 223. Whilst we didn't specifically ask questions about water meters in the consultation document, this has been something that we have received a significant amount of feedback on, and talking with my colleagues, I understand that the shift from when we were going out to consultation around previous water projects, it would feel like a fundamental shift may have occurred within the community. We also just wanted to highlight that in the last months of our consultation, when 2 of our preferred option colleagues made their decisions in terms of which option they were going to identify as the in-house business unit, we had a number of questions during engagements around this that people were wanting to understand better. What did that mean for us in terms of our option 1? And we think just a point to note that what we're noticing is that for councils of the size of ours versus some that are much smaller in scale across the country, we think that there is this clarity piece that is quite confusing around the single council CCO and independent business unit, and potentially is leaning towards favouring more a medium-sized council versus little rural, smaller councils across the country. But we'll pick that up again in our report next month. So I think finally, just in terms of the documents that you have in front of you, just wanted to record that the report that came out only identified the submissions at the date that we circulated the papers. There had been those late ones that we had received, but they were received through the normal process, so just wanted to record that as well.
And thank you. Through the chair, we're happy to take any questions that you may have. Thank you.
Great, thank you. So just if I can clarify first up, I think we've got a hard copy here of some updated graphs. So are these the latest numbers, the ones that we've been provided with today?
That's correct.
Great, thank you. Number questions. First, Councillor Hoffman.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. Thank you. Just a couple of questions. One's around, we've had some comments from people that have submitted today about the level of material that went out to people. How do you feel about the level of material that we have put out in terms of hard copy material?
I feel quite confident in the level of hard copy material that we did. So we had information that went out to homes. As far as I'm aware, we're the only council in the lower North Island who has actually sent information out to properties. We also obviously had hard copy information at our libraries, at our drop-in sessions, and at all of the engagement events that we had during the period.
Okay. Second is around the number of responses, 292, and one of them being a school. Do you feel, with this being our largest project that we're probably going to do for a long time, do you think that's a good level of response, knowing that it is the largest project that we're going to do for a long, long time?
I guess we are comfortable with the number of submissions we received based on the engagement we did. We heard repeatedly from people saying the two options that are viable are kind of the same. What you've said makes sense. I'm not going to bother making a submission. So what we have said, they don't. We know that sometimes people will make a submission if they maybe don't agree with something we're proposing, but when people sometimes are fine with it, we don't get that level, and we heard that over and over and over and over again at all of the sessions. The other thing that we are noticing, the trend that's happening with other councils, is that the councils who are proposing, again, as Julie said, are medium-sized councils who are proposing moving into a CCO are getting far fewer submissions than the smaller councils who are proposing to keep water in-house. We don't know why that is. Yeah, but that is a trend that I guess is happening nationwide.
Okay. Thanks, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Councillor Naylor.
Thank you. Just in terms of the graphs that we've been provided in terms of people's preferred option, has that been taken from the question that asks people, what is your preferred option?
Yes, that's correct.
I'm not sure if you had the opportunity to listen to the submissions, but you'll be aware that there are a number of submissions, including some of those who submitted today, where they've identified one option as their preferred option in that question, but then in their verbal submission and in their written submission have gone on to indicate, I think perhaps option 3 is the best option, but they had, they've made it clear that the reason they haven't chosen that option is that it says it's non-viable. So I'm wondering how you capture the verbal feedback when it's inconsistent with the way that people have answered that question.
Those themes have come through in all of the submission forms, and so the next, when we bring the May 7 report, we have very thorough analysis of all of the submissions based on different age groups, different sectors, what people of different options say. So while people may have said that they preferred option 1, we have really clear explanations as to why and how that is. And a lot of people have said in their submissions, we would have loved to have kept doing it ourselves, but I've picked option 1. The other thing I just wanted to touch on was we didn't require people to choose an option on our form. So you'll see we've got just over 100 people who didn't pick. So obviously on a paper form, people can choose not to answer any questions. On the website, people could also choose not to select an option as well. So that wasn't one of our, requirements in case people wanted to pick up on some of those themes. And we did notice, as Julie said, once Kapiti and Manawatu had picked their options, we noticed that there was a change in people not selecting options and then just giving us their feedback generally.
Okay, and in terms of the engagement, how much do you think people's understanding of the reason that option 3 is not viable relates to the non-water financial commitment in the LTP?
I think it would be fair to say, Councillor, that this was one of the most challenging things for us when we were sitting with the community to try and help them understand the reason why it was not financially viable for council, and so therefore being able to meet the legislation. Most engagements we were at, we always had a finance person with us, which was also very helpful, but it is very confusing. I think it was what I was alluding to a little bit earlier, that from the point of view of the consultation document, I think we've done a really good job of trying to explain it in plain language. However, it is a very complex matter, so it did take a little bit of work to talk to people about it during our engagement.
Okay, thank you. And just final question. You mentioned in your introductory comments that it was a resounding outcome in terms of option one. The difference between the preference being 199, 195 and 181 looks quite close to me between the three options. Why would you suggest that that's a resounding outcome if there's only a few percent difference in between those preferred options?
Sorry, you might be just misinterpreting how that graph is showing. So of the 292 submissions we received, 199 people have chosen option one as the preferred option.
And so the second one down where it says option two, 195, is that the second option?
That's the second choice. That's the second rank. So
Okay.
they have ranked it as the second option.
Okay, thank you for that clarification.
You're welcome.
That's useful.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Johnson.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Tim. I've got a few questions. The first one is, can you just remind us again what assumptions were made about harmonisation when we went out for this consultation? Were we consulting on harmonisation from year one, from year three? And what discussions around the differences in costs have we had with people related to when harmonisation might occur?
Councillor, I think we'll ask our finance partner to answer that question.
Morning all, Scott Manser, Manager of Finance. In the numbers that were published in the consultation document, they were harmonised at year 10, and we were running some other scenarios around where and what other options could be done in light of the conversations, and that will definitely be a negotiating point with any future CCO that the council's on board with that.
Do you think our members of the public were aware of that?
It was in the Morrison Law information that was made available to support that. Much like has been referenced through the submissions and the commentary, it's a very technical and quite hard to grapple, particularly if you don't have amazing financial knowledge. And I think we've done our best to ensure that those things are available and easily understood for members of the public. It's probably not really answered the question, but...
Okay, move on to something else. Do you think if the costs had been different, that people would have picked different options? In other words, do you think cost was the main factor that resulted in people opting for option one?
I'm going to plead the ignorance there and say that I can't really answer that question on the basis that I'm not the people that submitted, but generally that's a theme that we get as cost drives a large volume of choice.
Okay, so where I'm going with this is how much confidence we can have in the results of the submission process, given that figures might move around, and if we had presented different figures, might we not have got different results?
I think there's every chance that if the figures change, we might get different results. That's no different to any other program that council chooses to put in its long-term plan or annual plan, and the risk of that being incorrect or changing either upwards or downwards as we get closer to those completion dates.
Can I also just add though, the reason we included the 13 values in the consultation document was for this particular reason. What we were trying to get the community to give their views on outside of the cost component, and as I mentioned earlier, it is ranked second in the values of those 13 that we presented. So I think what we were trying to do there was to keep the balance between understanding that cost and affordability was likely to be the highest concern. If you'd looked at the values results, it's actually come out second. So from a confidence point of view, I suppose we could look at that and say the community has said that they are concerned about other elements as opposed to just cost.
Okay, so we can be confident in the values analysis irrespective of the numbers. In other words, is that what you're trying to say?
That was the whole reason we included that in the consultation.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. Thank you. Now, when the analysis comes back to council, are we going to get a more nuanced appraisal rather than just, well, this was the most popular option? Because it was clear from submissions this morning that people's opinions about the best option are conditional on other factors, and depending on the question that was put to them, their opinions bounce around a bit. So will that needs be able to be reflected back when we get the final report? Because I know you can only do so much, but a graph like this, to my mind, doesn't seem to be reflecting what we heard this morning.
Yes, so we wanted to make sure that you had the graphs for this one, so that was the first bit of data we could pull quickly for this meeting. The next report has very thorough analysis that picks up the nuances. I think we're up to about 10 or 11 pages of how different groups feel about different things and how they rank options differently and why they rank options like that. So all of that stuff is captured in that analysis.
Okay. Just reflecting on the document that we put out, I mean, has more information come out since we put that document out that would have, if we were writing again today, we would do it differently?
To me, the tricky one is the Kapiti Manawatu not making a preferred option, but I guess that's our situation, and it would have been a different council situation at a different point, because we're all working on these tough time frames and we're not all making the decisions as a group of councils together. It does make that difficult. That's probably my one. Do you guys have others? Okay.
All right, I'll leave it there. Thank you.
Good question.
Mr. Mayor.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. Thank you, team. Just on the non-harmonisation until year 10, and I realise it's in fine print, Morrison report and everything else. Do you really think other councils understood that?
At an officer level, they probably did.
Yeah.
In their consultation documents, we could provide some commentary back, and I know Julie through the transition manager team did do that. Was that explicit in their consultation documents and in their public engagement? I couldn't answer because I haven't overly paid too much attention to that.
Okay, and option 2 gives us still an opportunity to talk to other councils if they come back in the door. That's correct?
Yes, that's correct.
And in some ways that has the same benefit as option 1.
Yes, that's correct.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. So just finally for me, 5th of December, we had a majority vote that took a single council CCO off the short list, and so we did not consult on a single council CCO as a result of the vote that we took. How much information is there within the written submissions that still allow us to gauge any community response around that option despite it not being on the short list?
There were a number of people that actually submitted specifically to say, why did we not come out to consult on that? So in the analysis report, we will include that information for you.
Great. Thank you all. It appears to be the end of questions. Which brings us to the recommendations, and there are 2. First, that the committee receive the memorandum titled Local Water Done Rate Submissions presented to the Sustainability Committee 16 April 2025, and secondly, that the committee note that deliberations will be referred to council. I'm happy to move those, seconded by Councillor Zabellin, and we'll open up for any comments. noting that this is the summary of submissions report. Councillor Johnson.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. I just wanted to make a couple of comments about the submissions that we received and the summary and how we might consider them, because I think it became very clear to me reading the submissions and listening to those who submitted today that it's not a simple, we prefer one or we prefer two, that actually, depending on conditions being moved around a bit, people's preferred option changes. And so I think despite the graph, seeming to say, oh, well, most people prefer option one, I think it was fairly clear that when people were questioned about their decision on that oftentimes people had chosen an option because another one wasn't available, or they had chosen an option because that appeared to be the cheapest one, although we now know that some of those figures will not be the same. So I think in terms of how much confidence we can place in the results of the submission process, I'm more basing my thinking on people's ranking of what was important to them in terms of values than I am necessarily their choices, because firstly, the choices were limited. Secondly, the information that we were able to present at the time, because of the pressure we were under to consult, was limited, and some of that has changed. Thirdly, I think it's pretty clear that even some elected members didn't quite understand when harmonisation might occur, let alone members of the public. And so all of those things combined, I think, would perhaps be wise to put weight on people's priorities rather than people's absolute choices, and that would be my thinking at this stage. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Naylor.
Thank you. Yeah, I agree with the comments that have just been made. I think this was a really difficult task, and I just want to acknowledge the huge amount of work that's gone in, particularly by staff, to try and do the best possible process of consulting despite the really difficult circumstances, and I think they've done as well as we could possibly expect under the circumstances. Given what Councillor Johnson has already articulated, I do question how valuable just simply looking at the option numbers. We know for a fact that it's hugely influenced by which one is going to be less costly. And I think it's also significantly influenced by the fact that we've labelled one of those options as non-viable. The level of understanding that our community have about the other factors of what's made that non-viable, in particular the level of spend in our LTP on other non-water assets, may well not be well understood by many in our community. And it was definitely understood by some and particularly those who submitted today. There was a clear connection that people were making to affordability and concern around rates increases and what we've got in our annual budgets and our long-term plan. And I'm pleased to hear that some of those will submit into those processes as well. But this cannot be viewed in isolation to that. The pure fact that we've had to label one as non-viable is directly related to the level of spend that in our long-term plan. That of course is water spend, but also the non-water spend is hugely significant, and that's what's made that option non-viable. I'm also interested to read in the officer's report the level of comments that people have made, and I have seen that through some of the submissions, in terms of people's interest in a single CCO, and I'm definitely interested to understand more about how that might be an option in the papers that come through in the future as well.
Councillor Hopata.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. Just briefly want to thank the officers for all the work they did in the consultation process. I do want to say that I am disappointed in it, only because I do think the level and number of submissions that we did get in is not enough. I think we could have got more. Not just knowing how we get more, but I think this is the issue that's the biggest issue for us, and we haven't got enough here to make that decision because it's the biggest issue that we should be discussing, and we should be discussing at least 1,000 submissions or 2,000 submissions, and we haven't got them in front of us. I do think we didn't put enough information. I did raise this when we went out for consultation. I don't think we put enough information out to our community for them to discuss this, so I don't think there was enough out there. But anyway, that's gone. Can't discuss the past. Going forward, I just don't think, we've got enough submissions from everybody, so that's my point going forward. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Zabellan.
Thanks, Mr. Chair, and thank you for the report. Just harking back to the discussions that we had in approving the document for consultation, was key pushback that we had. This is the coming out with concepts of a plan and one non-viable option that we were forced to consult on, and that was always going to produce very difficult data for us to rely on because the key pieces just weren't in place yet. So I do appreciate how the submissions have, many of the submissions have understood that that is the state of play. And I really just so much appreciate and echo others' comments, the effort that's been gone to, the pains that have been taken. I know that staff worked extremely hard, really long hours, weekends and all, and the discussions that have been had with the community who came out to talk to us, those have been really valuable interactions. But the whole reform has just been really poorly thought out and badly timed and rushed through at an unnecessary speed. Government playing a really dodgy game here with a critical resource, and just how much our community values water, that's come through really loud and clear in the submissions and in this consultation. I do think the greatest benefit here is the data, it's in the quality of conversations we've had and the increasing clarity that this is being done to us and not by us, because that's come through in many submissions as well. So thank you so much for the report and for the consultation work.
Thank you, Councillor. The Mayor.
Oh, thank you, Mr. Chair. Look, colleagues, it's interesting in all the comments, and I don't want to make a political statement because there's been a few already said this morning, but I do think we need to be open to all councils' options as well. And I understand that there may be something come back in that space, so we just got to be open to that. I'm struggling, and I'm sure other councils and even other mayors and elected members around the wider region don't really understand the harmonisation or the non-harmonisation discussion that doesn't actually happen till year 10. I guarantee that that would influence or possibly make a different discussion with our colleagues. So that may be quite an interesting conversation in the coming weeks. So I think we've got to keep our and we thank everybody that submitted, but we've got to really be quite open to what may come through the door in the coming months. Look, the time frame, it is what it is. I agree, it's not ideal, but it's the cards we've been dealt, and we just have to do the best we can for everybody with what we've got in front of us. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Arnott.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you to officers for all the work thus far. It's certainly a massive thing the city has to decide. Thank you to all the citizens that we've all met at the information sessions, and thanks to those that submitted here today. I guess this room needs to be really sure of the decision that we're going to make, and this is the biggest decision that the city's ever probably going to make. So I think a lot of citizens that I've spoken to are scared, as we've heard here today, and this really is make or break for the city, so we need to be very sure what we're doing coming up very soon. Thank you.
Thank you, colleagues. Not seeing any further speakers in the queue, I'll just briefly say I think this has us well primed for the debate coming up 7th of November, or 7th of May. 7th of November is quite some way off. Yeah, just to add a few reflections into it, it is unfortunate we didn't have the single council CCO model on the list. I think, the extent to which community comment has expressed interest in that space means that it would have been a useful addition to the queries and questions that we had available. But absolutely accept that that's a direction that came from this table rather than anywhere else. Appreciate the work across columns 3 Waters Finance on this, and absolutely appreciate the members of the public who have come along to those meetings, come along to speak to their submissions this morning, and who have written in. And we do have a very good reference point in terms of where the community is at, except Councillor Hoppetta's point that it would be useful, and appreciate seeing even more submissions, but absolutely appreciate every the 292 that we do have with us, and look forward to the debate on the 7th of May. With that, we'll call for a vote. Thank you. And that is passed 13 votes for and none against. Colleagues, draw your attention to item 9 on the agenda, the annual sector lead report for Environment Network Mano 2. It gives me great pleasure to invite Amy Viles, Community Development Manager, Mads Bachtel, the E&M Coordinator, and Jean Hera, the Acting E&M Chairperson, to the table to present their annual sector lead report. Take a moment to get settled in, arrange the chairs how you need to, and we look forward to hearing from you.
Morena koutou, Amy Viles, Community Development Advisor.
Kia ora koutou, ko Mads toko ingoa. I'm the Environment Network Manawa 2 Coordinator.
Kia ora koutou, Jean here. I'm one of the board members.
Thanks. Just Jean and Mads, perhaps your microphone is just a little bit closer. My hearing aids aren't in today, so that'd help. Over to you.
Presenting the Environment Network Manawa 2 Annual Sector Lead Report. Presenting the report, taken as read. Welcome any questions.
Great, thank you. We do have questions, starting with Councillor Zabellan.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. Good morning. I had a question on the assessment of agreed activities and the developing score that's been given, I think on page 23, sorry, for priorities 1, 2 and 3. And the commenting there is on, due to limited resourcing, the focus and demand of the Food Action Network has impacted on the ability of E&M to share equal focus on source to sea. I was wondering to what extent the wrapping up of Jobs for Nature funding might have had on that work stream, or whether that has helped to balance resource in the past.
Thanks for that question. That has had an impact on us. In fact, the Jobs for Nature project, our Rohini Kiwi project, actually took quite a lot of our attention for the last 3 years, and our kind of biodiversity resourcing, our source to sea resourcing was almost not diverted, but like a lot of the energy of that was going to helping to deliver that program of work. And so it's kind of multifaceted. At the same time we were building up our food action work. And so with the finishing of that Jobs for Nature funding, we've had the opportunity to kind of reassess how we delivered that project and that program, and how we were investing that part of our money into that spot, and to realise that we need to prioritise back to a wider membership support model. So it has had an impact. It's had a strong impact in the way that we've developed our strategic plan going forward, and our priorities of making sure that our work is supporting our membership more than just one specific project going forward. Yeah.
Thank you. And then you mentioned your new strategic direction, and you have the PO there. So is that sort of part intrinsically balancing out the variety of work streams?
Yes, that's right. It is, and we are wanting to balance those out. And we've like a little bit of renaming there. So rather than than talking directly about the functions or those specific groups that have formed. We've kind of taken a step back up and go, what is the purpose of these groupings? Because sometimes groups will come and go within that. But the 4 PO that we're looking at now are biodiversity engagement, biodiversity enhancement and protection, climate action, food sovereignty, and circular economy. And so the climate action and circular economy are kind of emerging areas for us. And there are groups that have been existent in those spaces for a long time, but we just haven't kind of formulated collectives for them before. So we're wanting to kind of go, actually, there's a significant amount of work happening in those areas, in particular climate action, and there's a massive crossover between all of the work across those groups, but kind of going, how can we support those groups better? So that's.
Thank you. And then just one for Amy in terms of the assessment of those going forward. Are we assessing those on the satisfaction survey that's mentioned there solely, or is there a sort of multi-criteria analysis in terms of outputs and things like that? How are we assessing that?
We base the assessment on the 6 monthly data that we receive from E&M, but also more broadly on the relationship that we have with them.
And can I just speak to that again? Like our contract is coming up for renewal, it says in the report, that we're negotiating that now. So we're just currently negotiating what those measures will look like for those areas that we've been contracted to do for the next 3 years.
Right, so pretty timely as well.
Yes.
So, great. Thank you. Thanks very much, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Johnson.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. Thanks, Amy, Mads and Jane. Just in terms of the comment of lack of resourcing, is that lack of finance or lack of staff, people to do the work, as regarding the same point that Councillor Isabella raised up, the developing activity around Source to Sea. So it says due to limited resourcing. So what's the limit there? Can you help us understand that?
I can try. I think that it's a mixture of money and necessarily going forward. We are starting to get some ducks in a row, which is great. But we have had significant resourcing gaps this year, and our budget was, we were budgeting a $40,000 surplus, deficit rather, and kind of trying to tighten our belts a bit to get there. So that's not related necessarily to PNCC's resourcing. That's been really solid for us. But just kind of things like Jobs for Nature, dropping MFE, taking out environment centres funding through our EHA. So a variety of different kind of tools and just tightenings of belts that have been happening have made it a bit difficult this year. And then that has a flow-on effect to capacity. So,
Okay, yeah, no, I understand
and then the prioritisation of capacity. So we had 2 people within 2 part-time roles in the food area because of the demand that we were seeing, plus a casual staff person doing some on the ground work, and so we're just working within our new strategic priorities to kind of shift the balance so that we're starting to balance some of that out a bit.
Yeah, so I note that there has been huge growth in the food action car resilience space. Has there any thought been given to maybe, this might sound a bit radical, but like separating that off from E&M so that it becomes its own thing, which would then give E&M opportunity to focus on those areas of work that were not receiving as much attention, since MFAN and the whole car resilience seems to have a life of its own. Like, has it got to a point where E&M is almost overwhelmed by that and needs to maybe separate it off? I don't know. Is that
good question. We haven't considered that particular option. We are looking at how we can, our current strategic plan is looking at how we can support the Rohini Kiwi project to do its own thing. So that's currently in action. So so that is a specific piece of work, like just one task, if you know what I mean. Like it's pretty big one, but but we are looking actively at how do we set up a governance group and set its own trust up to go off and do its own thing, and to make sure that it's well held, but not in the food area. We haven't identified that as a priority at this point.
Okay, so how are you proposing to cope with the I think it was described as exponential growth
Across the organisation?
Yeah.
Well, it's in our strategic plan. I'm not sure if you've got a copy of that. Yeah. So we have a 3-year plan to deal with that. We're looking at putting together a financial strategy, which will help. We've created a new kind of organisational structure where we have 4 PO leads, and we're looking to find ways to have enough capacity, enough resourcing to be able to put a full-time person into each of those roles, and then those PO leads will do kind of the coordination in those spaces. That's the plan. We're not going to be able to do that this year, but we are looking to at least get a part-time person in each one of those roles, probably.
Okay, thanks very much.
Mr. Mayor.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. Thanks, team, and thank you for the work that you do. Just on back to Councillor Johnson's questions around the funding, resourcing and that, obviously the city funds you to about 190,000. What do Horizons do?
Horizons Fund they've put $50,000 towards the Rohini Kiwi project, so that they've named that as an icon project.
Right.
So that's the most significant piece of work with us.
Okay.
We also receive a couple of grants, so they support food resilience work through their Climate Action Fund, or they have done for the last 3 years, and I believe they will again. And we also have received freshwater funding from them for our plastics pollution work. So those are contestable grants.
Okay, well, what sort of value are they?
We get 15,000 for the Plastics Pollution Challenge and about 16 for the Climate Action Fund. Yep.
On top of the Kiwi?
And 50 for the Kiwi, yep.
Okay. Do any other councils, because you are Manawa too?
Yes.
Do any other councils?
We have had real trouble getting other councils to come on board and to recognise our leadership in their spaces. I have a little bit of, one of the things indicated in here in the report is that we're looking to expand the reach and scope of our Environmental Initiatives Fund, and we've got some very promising conversations happening with Eastern and Central Community Trust to be able to do that. And if that falls into place, ECCT are also talking about how they can leverage that to get those other councils to become partners within that process. So I think that will, all of these conversations may come to something, and I'm hoping they will.
Great. Okay. Thank you.
Councillor Hancock.
Yeah, thanks, Mr. Chair, and I've just come in late. My question's really, Councillor Johnson and the Mayor have both actually sort of prompted me to ask this question. You're talking about the potential of actually splitting off various projects or initiatives to have their own kind of sort of governance.
Just the one project, Rohini is what we're hoping will achieve.
Yep. Okay. But Councillor Johnson actually just talked about MFL, so I'm just thinking in terms of where you're currently at and where that might in fact actually lead us, with the Kiwi project as it stands. What are the risks around that in the current funding environment? Is that sustainable?
The Kiwi project currently is not sustainable. No, we've only got $50,000 a year, well, plus a few donations. So we've got a current project lead who is doing a really good job of pulling together those conversations, looking at a new creating a redeveloped pest management plan, looking at some new monitoring techniques, and talking to a whole lot of people about what the governance structure will need to look like and where the funds are going to come from to make it go forward. So it's not currently secure, but we have $50,000 for 3 years from Horizons, actually, so it's not just a once-off. So we've got 2 more years of that base kind of core holding funding, but we, those conversations are looking like really positive. There's some excellent things coming out of that project leadership, and yeah, there should be some pretty good updates in the next 6 months on that.
Okay, no, I was just concerned that around the sustainability of that and the risk management of, I guess, spreading yourselves too thinly and perhaps actually sort of breaking off parts of the. So I just really wanted some reassurance around that. Thank you.
Yeah, no. So the way that we've established the project now is to focus at the moment on making sure that we're setting up the establishment of the kind of the leadership and the structure of that, so that it's really strong and can go off and do its own thing.
Great, thanks, Matt. Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Perhaps just a couple of questions for me, seeing none others in the queue. Just on the Rohini Kiwi, is there a connection between that project and the Capital Kiwi project in Wellington in terms of looking at how they're approaching things and having success there?
Yes. We talk about that quite often, and there's definitely been conversations with the Capital Kiwi guys, and will be more to come. Yeah.
Great, thanks. Just looking at the year overall, could you just give us a couple examples of some of the things that you're proudest about in terms of on-the-ground impact?
Well, I do think that the food work is really is thriving and amazing, and actually probably my little proudest thing is actually getting that food policy through this table and passed. So you know, that's a big piece of work. It's something that kind of came from the work that we were doing around COVID and the food, the plan that we kind of put together quite a few years ago, and started implementing, and came here and said, look, we need a policy for the city. So to see that come to fruition, yeah, it's pretty amazing. And then also just to see the number of groups that are taking some of the work that our team have been doing, copying it within the city and beyond. You know, like, so the gardens and home that Beth Lou has sort of started, that has spread to Fielding and to New Plymouth somewhere, I think. You know, like there's little ideas. Waitara have a Pātaka Kai is the name of their organisation, and they have just presented to their council saying they want to have a Waitara Food Action Network. And, you know, like, so little things like that where things are spreading based on the excellent work that our team are doing.
Shall I just comment as a board member too? I've only been on the board for a year, so I came and listened to the presentation last year and then said, you know, are you looking for any help on governance? So I've had a lot of experience in governance from national level to small community groups. And I have to say I'm really impressed with E&M from their governance side of things. I think the strategic planning work has been pretty amazing, really. There's a lot of work has gone on into that, a lot of transformation and looking for growth in the future. I think the Rohini Kiwi changes too, they're very challenging, and to be able to get to the stage we have a project lead kind of reinventing that in the current situation. So for me, those are two big things, and I'm really quite proud of our PO that we've developed as part of the strategic planning, and to broaden things. Also, new members all the time, something that impresses me too. We get applications for new membership regularly, so it's growing.
Yeah. Great, thank you. Jean, perhaps if I could pick up a little bit on that. So in the written report that we've seen, there's in paragraph 3.4, there's some conversation around some of the tensions that were there in terms of the development of that strategic plan and kind of getting the grassroots input and buying into it. And I guess for those of us that were at the AGM, we saw a little bit of that tension kind of surface there. And just could you kind of take us from the AGM through to kind of where things are now in terms of that grassroots feedback and buying around the strategic plan and how it's operating today?
I think some of the problem was lack of understanding. So there's been work going into that, so that those who had concerns were talked to on a one-to-one and were able to have input and understanding. And there were a few tweaks, but not a huge amount of change that happened. through that process. And I think, yeah, there were a few tricky things, and a lot of that was connected with changes with Rohini Kiwi, but that's sort of, yeah, I think it's coming right from what I can see. Also, the constitution work we're doing is really big too, to be able to do that in a process that has all the membership involved. So going out with sort of questions for people to have input to, and then incorporating all that into the new constitution that's required. So that's another big thing that's been happening that I've been part of.
Great, thanks for those comments. Go to Councillor Michelad for a question.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thanks, guys, for the work that you're doing in this space. Some of my questions have been asked by the Mayor around the financial concerns that you have, but the other questions that I have was largely around the growth that you're experiencing, because we had a lot of community organizations come here and say they're struggling with numbers and that sort, but we've seen that you're picking up in membership, and also your social media pages are picking up in numbers as well. So I'm interested to know what you're doing. What are you doing in this space that's making you grow that fast? And for other organizations that might be struggling, that sort of thing. So would you mind sharing the recipe?
Thank you. I don't know the exact recipe, unfortunately. These things kind of happen by magic. But I think the connections that people make at our collective meetings, you know, when we bring the biodiversity group together and they, you know, have some good conversations, good food, and we're bringing, you know, not just people who are really active in the space, but bringing new volunteers into those conversations as well, and then they're able to make connections and go off and do the hard work. Those are really valuable and kind of the magic source, I would say. And then, I don't know, word spreads and people want to be part of it. I think in terms of social media picking up, we've just got a great team. We've got Rini, who's doing a fantastic job of really kind of identifying what is our message, what are we trying to say, what are we trying to do, how are we going to help the members the best, you know, the best way possible. So she's really been working hard the last 6 months on developing our social media so that it lines up with what we're really trying to achieve as a whole, which is to support our members. And so really telling their stories and finding ways to do that is, I think, is what's connecting with people.
Thank you.
Great, thank you all. That does appear to be the balance of questions answered, so appreciate the report and invite you to retake your seats in the gallery.
Thank you.
Colleagues, we have before us a recommendation, just one, that the committee receive the memorandum titled Annual Sector Lead Report, Environment Network 902, presented to Sustainability Committee 16, April 2025, which I'll look to move, seconded by Councillor Zabellin, and we'll open up for any comment. Starting off with Councillor Michelad.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and I just want to thank also the staff from E&M for the work that they're doing, and also Amy for the work that she's doing in that space. I think for me, the concerns that I had, especially around the financial sustainability of the organization, and also seeing the tune at which we are also funding the organization. I was actually talking to the Mayor, asking what can we do to also get other councils involved around this, seeing that E&M is work, which is not only, work or initiatives which are not only completed or do not only have a focus on Palmerston North, but also have initiatives that have far broader implications or impact on the water Manawatu. And I was a bit concerned about the lack of support, I would say, that we are actually the lack of support from other councils. And I feel like we're doing all the heavy lifting, especially in this space, compared to our neighbours around the block. And I'm a bit disappointed in this. Overall, I think it was a good report. Thank you very much for the work that you're doing. And also, many of the initiatives that you're doing in the community which are pushing a lot of our community to be more sustainable in the waste collection, be it in the food waste and that sort of things as well. So thank you very much for that. I'm also pleased with the growth that you're experiencing. I think it's a good thing. I think what you guys are doing in this space is also good, and I think a lot of community organizations that are struggling for growth and numbers of membership should actually learn a lot from you guys, especially around the level of engagement that you are undertaking or that you're doing with the community as well. It shows that what you're doing is cutting, is getting some cut through amongst all the noise. So I just want to commend you on that. On that note, I'll leave it at that. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Johnson.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. Thanks very much to E&M for the report and for coming in and answering questions. And I mean, first of all, it's a really good report and with some excellent outcomes for the community, so well done. But I think what it does highlight is, and we heard this when we had the lead sector reports in Community Committee as well, when other funding sources are stepping back, it's leaving some of our community groups in a vulnerable position. Council we may be continuing with our support, but support from other funds is in high demand, being reduced and cut in some places, and that is putting some of our really successful groups under pressure, and I think that's what we're seeing a little bit through E&M. So, I think that this really reflects a trend across the community and not-for-profit sector that we should be aware of. Puts us in a slightly difficult position because we don't have a lot of extra funds to play with ourselves. But it does show the value of the community sector in being able to produce such fantastic outcomes on actually what is a very small amount of funding when you look at it. So in terms of the growth, I think it's encouraging and uplifting to hear that you're getting new groups signing up and growth is occurring, but at the same time, very rapid growth is a challenge for any organisation, and particularly one that at the same time is having resourcing reduced. So we understand that that's difficult, and hopefully we can provide as much support as possible. So that's all I want to say. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Zabellan.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thanks for coming in and for all your supporters for coming in as well. I was just reflecting that when I'm thinking about a sector lead organisation, what their function is, I think that it's clear that E&M is truly acting as a sector lead in the truest sense, and that it's a central hub for a whole range of activities that have originated independently and tend to be run independently for all those groups and individuals who are wanting to build a stable ecology or upskill communities in terms of having options in a cost of living nightmare, ways to reduce food costs, reduce waste, build their food resilience or repair skills, and making better use of what we've got. The outputs in your report are very impressive. And to my mind, a sector lead is the natural point of contact and support for a particular area of work, and to help those small groups to do their work at that grassroots level. And the growth that you've experienced is showing a clear need in the community across all of those areas. So congratulations. And I think having that better off measure in there for assessing the success is particularly fitting for this sector in terms of who is better off as a result of the work that you've been doing. But it is also difficult when it relies on a survey result, because we all know that surveys don't have 100% uptake, and sometimes the results are not necessarily can be illustrative of a point in time rather than an entire experience. So I do think it's a good measure, but I do acknowledge that it's not a perfect measure by any sense. But thank you for your work as a sector lead and supporting so many different organisations, over 60 organisations, to do really impactful work on the ground. Thanks.
Thank you, and just briefly concur with the comments that have been made from colleagues, and thank you for those. Just noting, Councillor Michelet, that the ratepayers in neighbouring communities are able to make a small contribution through Horizons, but absolutely concur with your core point that the local authorities could be involved in that story as well. So thank you for that. And just absolutely pleased to hear from E&M your tremendous progress and strong contribution over the last year. I think you're now into your third decade of making contributions to community and environment as an organization, and it's just amazing to see the strength and the progress that is there. So on behalf of the committee and community, absolute thank you to the board. Thank you to the manager, the staff that you've assembled, the dream team there, and that army of volunteers that are out there doing all that good work. Over 60 organizations networked together. That is, as Councillor Zabellin said, a real leadership example in terms of drawing the sector together and taking it forward. You're absolutely in a point needing to continue to manage change as there's tremendous growth in some areas and challenges in others, and really commend you on the hard work as was acknowledged around developing that strategic plan and getting buy-in around that strategic plan to have for strong PO around climate action, food action, biodiversity and circular economy contributing, and wish you all the very best for the year ahead as you continue with that progress. So wish you all well and thank you. With that, colleagues, we will call for a vote. And that is passed 14 votes in favor and none against. Colleagues, item 11 on our agenda today, the committee work schedule, and ask the general manager to comment.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just a couple of comments. The first one is the paper regarding the options for indicators to include in the 2026 Sustainability Review. We'll get a paper to the next Sustainability Committee, which is 18th of June. I just note that those options are likely to, or anticipate those options will focus on existing data sets available inside and outside of the organisation. And the two items regarding the stormwater strategy, I think reporting on those, we can provide an update following the workshop this afternoon. There's been good progress made on that piece of work, but ultimately the pace at which Council wants to move on that work and the level of consultation will be informed by the workshop this afternoon.
Great, thank you. Looks like a couple of questions. Councillor Hancock.
Yeah, thanks, Mr. Chair. Just a query, just in respect of the Manawatu Wanganui Climate Joint Action Committee update. That's just as required, and I think the last update we got was October last year. So I was just wondering what the timeline might be on future reports.
Go to General Manager for that.
Yeah, I'll have to check in with the meetings, the latest meeting schedule for that committee, but the intention is to report after meetings. So we'll check when the next meeting is, and if there's one between now and the 18th of June, then we'll get an update.
Councillor Zabellin.
Thank you. I just had a question about the waste management and minimisation plan. It's in there as the 2019 plan, but we've since adopted the 2024 plan. So I was wondering, is there still a crossover from the 2019 plan, or are we getting our first report on the 2024 plan?
Yeah, through you, Mr. Chair. I think that's an error. So yeah, it would obviously be reporting against the new plan.
Thanks very much.
Great, thank you. If there's no further questions, we'll move the Sustainability Committee receive its work schedule dated April 2025, which I'll move, seconded by Councillor Zabellin. No comments, we'll call for a vote. That's passed unanimously, 13 votes for, none against. I'd like to thank our governance manager for acknowledging that we need to also address item 8 on the agenda, which is the confirmation of minutes. of 19 February. So bringing that to screen, we have a recommendation that the minutes of the Sustainability Committee meeting of 19 February 2025, Part 1, public, be confirmed as a true and correct record, which I'm happy to move. Seconded by Councillor Zabellin. Councillor Hancock.
No, it's all right. I was going to call for item 8. Thank you.
Thank you. There being no other questions and no corrections, we'll call for a vote. That's passed 11 votes for and 2 abstentions. And just checking with colleagues to my right, I believe that brings us to the end of the agenda, save for the kia, which I'll give now. Kia puta, ki te whao, ki tau marama, whakamoia ki atina, homie, huie, tai kie. That closes off at 12:18.